Gresham College presents Debussy Text and Ideas, the literary and musical genesis of Debussy's Fêtes Galantes, Série 2, by Professor Marie Rolf.
Career. So Marie's paper today is the musical and literary genesis of Debussy's Fêtes Galantes. And Marie will need very little introduction, but most of you will know her as one of the founding editors of Debussy's Œuvre Complète. So it's a great honour to have you here. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you very much, Helen. Before I start, I want to make sure that everyone has a handout because I'm going to be talking about a lot of different poetic texts, and you will find this helpful to refer to along the way. We do have a few extra copies. If you need a copy, please raise your hand, and I think Dick will come by and give you one. Claude Debussy drew on Verlaine's collection of Fêtes Galantes poems more than any other single source of verse. Ultimately, the composer set 8 of Verlaine's 22 Fêtes Galantes, 6 of which were published as Fêtes Galantes série 1 and série 2. In this slide, I show the order of the poems in Verlaine's original collection, and then in the second column is the order in which Debussy wrote them in a beautiful little collection of songs that he gave to his muse, Marie Beinecke. Debussy initially set the 3 songs comprising série 1 in the early 1880s. But by 1891, he had completely recomposed En Sourdine and Clair de Lune and revised Fantoche as well. Yet another decade would pass before the publication of série 1 in 1903, after the premiere of Pelléas et Mélisande had catapulted Debussy to fame. Fêtes Galantes série 2 appeared in 1904, 1 year after série 1. However, its compositional genesis unfolded quite differently. The 3 known manuscript sources for série 2 suggest that Debussy penned these songs within a relatively short period of time. Not only do they display similar chirography and page layouts, but they are all notated on 22-staved paper. This is just the first page of Les Ingénus in 2 of the sources, and you see how he indents the first line of the music and lays out the title in very, very similar way. However, discrepancies between the embossments in these manuscripts provide a clue that will help us to reconstruct their compositional history. Among the 3 songs in série 1, it seems that Colloque sentimental underwent the longest gestation period. Debussy alluded to the last Fêtes Galantes already in December 1885, when he asked Claudius Poplin to copy it out, as he could not afford to replace the volume of Verlaine poems he had lost. While the composer may have long contemplated setting Colloque sentimental, the manuscript evidence suggests that he did not act on this idea until much later. While his early version of this song sounds quite different from the published version, many of the idiomatic compositional qualities of the Durand setting, such as its underlying structure and the symbolic use of the nightingale motive from En Sourdine, the song that opened Fêtes Galantes série 1, are latently present. This intrinsic musical evidence thus corroborates the forensic evidence of the manuscript, suggesting that less time transpired between the 2 fundamentally similar versions of Colloque sentimental in série 2 than the decade between the early versions and the later complete recompositions of En Sourdine and Clair de Lune in série 1. From the documents available to us, it appears that Debussy's setting of Les Ingénus and Le Faune did not undergo such revision. However, a close study of the title page for Beinecke Manuscript 996 suggests two surprising possibilities that have passed without significant comment from scholars. First, Debussy initially listed only two songs, Le Faune, followed by Crépuscule du soir. Second, while Le Faune is part of Verlaine's Fêtes Galantes, Crépuscule du soir is not. Clearly, Debussy did not start out with a set of 3 Fêtes Galantes in mind. And clearly, even though Beinecke Manuscript 996 was used for the engraving, you see that right here, the engraver's marks, Debussy recycled an old title page and amended his titles before giving the manuscript to Durand. Notice that when he later added Colloque sentimental, which is right here in lead pencil, he also changed the order of the first 2 songs. The Faune, which used to be number 1, see how it has an extra little 2 in lead pencil, and Les Ingénus, which used to be number 2, it's crossed out and it becomes number 1. In this study, I will suggest some conceivable poetic sources for Debussy's projected setting of Crépuscule du soir, and then demonstrate why the composer might have aborted his initial concept. As we shall see, the compositional genesis of Fêtes Galantes série 2 reflects the process of Debussy's sublimation of his former Wagnerian tendencies and the emergence of a new compositional direction, one that parallels the dawn of a new poetic movement. To be sure, Debussy was susceptible to crepuscular impressions, especially around 1892-3, when he was sketching Trois scènes au crépuscule, an orchestral work that was presumably inspired by Henri de Regnier's Scènes au crépuscule poems. The poetic source for Crépuscule du soir, mentioned in Beinecke Manuscript 996, however, could be traced to Verlaine or to Baudelaire. Verlaine had published a Crépuscule du soir mystique as part of his Paysage triste, a subsection of the poème Saturnien in 1866. It is possible that, when initially penning this title page, Debussy hastily jotted down the titles from memory and that he simply omitted the adjective mystique. He misidentified poetic titles on at least one other occasion in a manuscript of Mandoline and the opening of En Sourdine, now at the Houghton Library in Harvard University. There, Debussy incorrectly identified the text of Fantoche as pantomime. He calls this pantomime, but it's actually the text of Fantoche. Fantoche there is written by Margaret Cobb. She loved to correct Debussy and many of us. And the text of pantomime, Debussy called Pierrot. Similarly, on the title page, he correctly cited Chevaux de Bois from Verlaine's Romance sans parole, but then incorrectly listed a poem called Paysage, possibly referencing the Paysage Belge, the section from Romance sans parole, which includes Chevaux de Bois. If, in fact, Debussy was planning to set Verlaine's Crépuscule du soir mystique, which you have on your handout along with translation on page 1, he may have been attracted to the poem's mesmerizing ABAB rhyme scheme and to its structure, which opens and closes with the same line, Le souvenir avec le crépuscule, and repeats the internal lines, which are set off by dashes, dahlia, lys, tulip, etc. In addition, its syntax, conveying essentially one complex sentence or thought over 13 lines, replete with enjambement, echoes Mallarmé, and its images echo Baudelaire. Recall the syntax of Mallarmé's Soupir, for example, or the descriptors of souvenir, cloison, and floraison, all present in Baudelaire's Le Balcon, the parfum of his Harmonie du soir, the Mille Fleurs of le jet d'eau, and the soir fait de rose et de bleu mystique in L'amour des amants. Perhaps Baudelaire provided the direct source for Debussy's planned Crépuscule du soir, as he wrote 2 poems with this exact title. His verse poem stems from Les Fleurs du Mal, probably known to Debussy from the 1868 publication that appeared 1 year after the poet's death. His second Crépuscule du soir was the first prose poem ever published by Baudelaire. Both versions portray the city's transformation at dusk. In the verse poem, which you have on your handout on pages 2 to 3, the workers leave their quotidian activities for the bustle of the theater, prostitution, gambling, and burglary under the stealth of darkness, where man turns into a wild beast, bête de fauve. And in the prose poem, which you have on your handout on pages 4 to 5, the emphasis is on the night's sinister transmogrification of people into madmen. Although Debussy had some previous experience in setting prose poetry with Pierre-Louis's Chanson de Bilitis, it is perhaps more likely that he would have chosen to set Baudelaire's verse poem, given the composer's preoccupation with Les Fleurs du Mal in the late 1880s, and given the prose poem's prohibitive length. Like Le Balcon, Harmonie du Soir, and Recueillement, Le Crépuscule du Soir is cast in Alexandrines, although it is longer, except for Le Jet d'eau, and more narrative than any of the 5 poèmes. While it eschews their repetition and refrains, its rhymed couplets lend it coherence. Many of the sentiments expressed in Recueillement, in particular, are echoed in Le Crépuscule du Soir. I've given some of the parallels for you on this handout. The tensions between day and night, light and dark, internal and external feeling, controlled and wild experience, peace and uproar, may be viewed as allegories for the past and the future, even for life and death. Perhaps this subject matter ultimately led Debussy to set the life after death, out-of-body experience portrayed in Colloque sentimental, signifying a new direction from his musical past. But more on that conjecture in a moment. No music for Crépuscule du Soir is extant. By the time Debussy fled to Jersey with Emma Bardak in June 1904, he had apparently jettisoned his plan to set Crépuscule du Soir, substituting instead a song on Les Ingénus, another poem from Verlaine's Fêtes Galantes, and he had reversed their order. Here you see that, in fact, Les Ingénus is already listed as 1, the Faun is 2, and this, I'm sorry the copy is so bad, but underneath his logo, his CD, is a little line, pour remercier le mois de juin 1904, to thank for the month of June, which is the month in which they eloped together. Even though this title page lists only Les Ingénus and Le Faun, the later version of Colloque sentimental is appended to this manuscript. However, its foliation is separate, and while the oval embossment of L'Art et Non appears at the bottom left of its pages, this embossment is at the bottom left of the pages of Colloque sentimental. The embossment appears at the top left of each folio of Le Faun and Les Ingénus. Incidentally, this same oval embossment is also present on the pages of Colloque sentimental in BNF 996, but these 2 songs have the lozenge-shaped embossment, showing that Colloque sentimental was subsequently added to the first 2 songs. We may thus infer that by June 1904, Colloque sentimental was in its relatively final state of composition, and that by then Debussy was thinking in terms of a collection of poems drawn solely from Verlaine's Fêtes Galantes, as explained on his title page. This is the first time where he lists on his manuscript Fêtes Galantes right up front. Why did Debussy abort his plan to set Crépuscule du soir? Perhaps the rhyme scheme and syntax of Verlaine's Crépuscule du soir mystique were too similar to those of Le Faune, which also features an alternating A-B rhyme scheme and conveys one long sentence. Furthermore, its circular qualities might have weakened the impact of those in Le Faune, which the composer depicted with an obsessively rhythmic bass ostinato, masterfully reflecting the poem's primal and ominous qualities. I'm going to play a clip of the opening of this. This is Noël Lee playing piano and Bernard Cuisen singing.
Faune de terre cuite rit au centre des bourgades.
So it's this one obsessive idea being represented by the ostinato and the bass. Or perhaps Debussy found that he could express the image of the setting sun, laden with connotations for the future of poetry in the minds of writers like Verlaine and Baudelaire, even more effectively in the twilight canvases of Les Ingénus and Colloque sentimental. If, on the other hand, Debussy was inspired by one of Baudelaire's Crépuscule poems, he may have found them too long and unable to be cut successfully, or too teeming and replete with seedy urban values that conflicted with his innate predilection to an understated symbolist aesthetic. Ultimately, the composer chose to set Verlaine's nocturnal poem, Colloque sentimental, cast in rhyme couplets akin to Baudelaire's crepuscular verse. And you have that on page 8 of the handout, where you see the rhymed couplets and the clear structure that features a central dialogue section between two ghosts who were former lovers. In the end, the A, B, B, A rhymes of each of the quatrains in Les Ingénus, which you have on your handout on page 6, as well as the innovative caesuras within its Alexandrine lines, served as a better foil to Le Faune than either Verlaine's or Baudelaire's Crépuscule poems. By reversing the order of Les Ingénus and Le Faune, Debussy began his set with a youthful, flirtatious poem whose third strophe hints at a subliminal deception, presaging the bad outcome, the suite mauvaise, predicted in Le Faune. And by appending Colloque sentimental, the composer ended his set with a bleak portrayal of lost love, reflecting literally on the past, but in the process, also attempting to wrest himself from a musical heritage that had been dominated by Wagner. He thus crafted a narrative within série 2 in the process of combining poems with different forms, metric structures, and rhyme schemes. All three songs of série 2 build on ostinati, and they are harmonically adventurous, liberally utilizing non-hierarchic whole tone scales and centering on an F-augmented sonority. In Les Ingénus, Debussy's shifts in pitch focus and textures mirror Verlaine's poetic structure. An F-augmented triad doesn't it? It is the twilight. That's an F-augmented triad right there. And this continues through the enjambement of intercepté at the beginning of the fourth line. Intercepté. And then Debussy, or I can show it. Intercepté, where we're on G flat for a moment, and then we shift to whole tone on C natural, along with a new grace note ostinato that depicts the stinging insects in the next section. It's the last bar in the top line. Hear those stinging insects in the grace notes. A momentary glimpse of G flat recurs with the éclair soudain de nuque blanche. Line 2, and then the falling twilight at the beginning of the third quatrain ushers a return to the F augmented sonority of the song's opening, Le soir tombé. It's a return. And the frisson of trembling souls in the final line is underscored with a momentary hint of G flat again on the third line. Which is dashed by the surprising turn at the end to the final F augmented triad suspended. No such harmonic shifts occur in Le Fond, where, as you heard, the libidinous bass ostinato portraying the poem's single sentence structure and hypnotic rhyme scheme runs throughout the entire song and sets up a tonal dichotomy between its focus on G-D and the F augmented triad in the top. In Colloque sentimental, a 34-bar long pedal unifies the entire dialogue section, and the F augmented sonority plays an important role as well, although the manner of its presentation changes between its first and second versions. The early version of Colloque sentimental opens with a conspicuous outline of F augmented. Sounds like this. Augmented sound. I think I have the top line for those of you who read music there, the F augmented in the second bar. Simultaneously, however, in this first version of Colloque sentimental, Debussy is weaving in this rossignol motive with the triplet idea, which comes from the opening of En Sourdine, which opened série 1 of his Fêtes Galantes. So clearly he was trying to tie together the two sets. Equally evocative, however, is a scarcely veiled reference to Wagner's Tristan at the climax of the poem, encapsulating the love-death emotions that play out in Colloque sentimental as well. That's shown for you in line 2, and it sounds like this. It's no coincidence that the rossignol melody of En Sourdine begins on that same G sharp, the top pitch of the half-diminished seventh chord in Tristan. And that this sonority, along with the melodic motion of G sharp to A, also permeates Debussy's 5 Poèmes de Baudelaire. Let me play those two for you back to back. First, the opening of En Sourdine. that's the sound. And now we're going to hear John Adams's orchestration of Recueillement. And I chose this orchestration of Recueillement because with his use of the colors of the orchestra, I think you will hear a distinct echo of Tristan, just as we did in En Sourdine and in the first version of Colloque Sentimental. This is Susan Graham singing BBC Symphony Orchestra with Tortelier. The textual and musical links between Tristan, the Cinq Poèmes, En Sourdine, and Colloque Sentimental are undeniable, and an earlier plan for a Baudelairean-inspired Crépuscule du soir would have been a natural iteration of these associations. But in the final version of Colloque Sentimental, published in Fêtes Galantes série 2, Debussy deliberately attempts to rid himself of Wagner's spectre, relegating that half-diminished seventh sonority to the background of the song, and using the G sharp, now A flat, as a pedal throughout the entire dialogue section. As well, Debussy's exposure of F augmented is far more subtle in this refined version. Rather than opening with that blatant F augmented chord, the song's overall tonal plan settles on initially an F major seventh, closes in A minor with an internal motion to D flat. F, A, D flat is the F augmented sonority. 19th century poets like Baudelaire and Verlaine focused on the privileged moment of twilight as an allegory for their move from the past toward a mysterious new direction. In responding to their crepuscular works, Debussy, too, found his way from Wagner towards a new compositional voice, one that approached its apex in his Fêtes Galantes série 2. Thank you very much.
For more information, please visit www.gresham.ac.uk.